also starting to ease. It is going to turn murky and misty across the south in particular, and temperatures dropping down to the mid-single figures. On to Thursday, and it will by and large be a dry and a bright day, but it is going to start pretty grey across the Midlands, South Wales, southern England. It may take a while before that cloud clears away. Quite cloudy too over Northern Ireland and western Scotland. A little bit of drizzly rain is possible at times here. It could be quite wet in the Western Isles, but for the vast majority, it is going to be a dry day, and it'll probably brighten up quite a bit as well. So some places seeing some sunshine and temperatures responding to that sunshine as well. The warmest weather across eastern England, 2021. Elsewhere, generally mid to high teens. A bit more of that patchy rain, just fringing into the Highlands at times through the nights, but otherwise, again, it's generally going to be a dry night with clear spells. Again, turning a little misty in some spots, and we'll see maybe a bit of showery rain just clipping the west of Wales, southwest England as we head into Good Friday. 1 or 2 showers across northern Scotland too, but again, for most Good Friday, dry and fine. Probably a sunnier day, certainly over the Midlands, parts of eastern England and northwest Scotland. Plenty of sunshine, and temperatures again responding to that sunshine, maybe up to the low 20s across the southeast. A little cooler perhaps on some North Sea coasts, and that could be a feature into Saturday as well. But for the Easter weekend, many places dry with some sunshine, turning cooler, a bit wetter by Monday.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6 for you this afternoon. Coming up this hour, with Ukraine in flames and talk of World War III, could it only be in Britain where a row over parties and cake threatens to unseat a politician who increasingly speaks for the free world? Brendan O'Neill of Spiked will be with me. As the Islamist killer of David Amos smiles and smirks as he gets a life sentence, how did he convince de-radicalisation experts that he posed no threat? And why has there been a sharp rise across Britain in the number of children with inflamed livers? Is it a legacy of COVID? Alongside me throughout today's show, the US-UK commentator Sarah Elliott. But first, the headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Just after 4 o'clock, the main story this hour. As you've been hearing, the terrorist who murdered Sir David Amos will spend the rest of his life in jail. The judge in the case said Ali Harbi Ali showed no remorse or even shame as he handed him a whole life sentence for killing the Conservative MP last October. Sir David's family described his murder as beyond evil. Met Police Assistant Commissioner Matt Jukes read out a statement on their behalf.
There is no elation in our family today following this sentencing. Our amazing husband and father has been taken from us in an appalling and violent manner. Nothing will ever compensate for that. We will wake each day and immediately feel our loss. We will struggle through each day for the rest of our lives. It breaks our heart to know that our husband and father would have greeted the murderer with a smile of friendship and would have been anxious to help. How sickening to think what happened next. It is beyond evil.
Households are feeling the pinch as the cost of food essentials rose sharply last month. The price of bread and butter shot up, along with other staples like milk and cooking oil. The cost of a loaf of bread is now over 5% more than it was a year ago. Overall inflation has jumped to 7% in the year to March. Finance analyst at Hargreaves Lansdown, Sarah Cole, says the cost of living is only going to get worse.
April, we're going to get the impact of the energy price cap hike, which is really going to push things up. So we're about 7% in March, is expected to go up to about 8% in April. So that's going to be even more painful. And then it's likely to go up again in October. So the Office for Budget Responsibility is sort of looking at sort of around about 9% in the sort of last quarter of the year. So whilst things are tough now, they're actually going to get increasingly tough throughout the rest of the year.
Politics and the Prime Minister's position has been described once again as untenable, this time by a Tory backbencher. The MP Nigel Mills is calling for Boris Johnson's resignation now. That comes after Mr Johnson, his wife and Rishi Sunak were fined by police for breaching COVID rules when they attended the Prime Minister's birthday party in June 2020. They've all apologised and confirmed the fines have been paid. Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross told GBNews Boris Johnson needs to focus on the job at hand, despite calling for his resignation himself in January.
About the Prime Minister in January, because I thought his actions were unacceptable. Now that the fixed penalty notice has been issued and accepted and paid by the Prime Minister, I still believe that, and I share the anger and the fury that many people have about this. But I can't also ignore the situation in Ukraine, where we've heard President Zelensky single out Boris Johnson as being one of the leaders in the West that has done most to help him and his people defend their country and their freedom.
Douglas Moss MP. The people suspected of leaking the CCTV footage of the former Health Secretary and his aide embracing in his office, which led to his resignation, will not be prosecuted. The images showed Matt Hancock with Gina Coladangelo, while social distancing rules were in place. The Information Commissioner's office launched a criminal investigation after it received a report of a personal data breach, but has concluded there's not sufficient evidence to charge anyone. The UK is sanctioning 178 Russian separatists for propping up breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine. The move has been coordinated with the European Union. That comes as Moscow's bombardment of the country continues. The mayor of Mariupol in the south has again accused Russian troops of using chemical weapons in the region.
The day before yesterday, Russian troops attempted to strike our city with a so-called chemical attack. They tried to drop a chemical agent on our defenders. The agent affected some of them, and there's evidence a number of people living in settlements around the outskirts of Mariupol were also affected. They had a taste in their mouth which warned them that something was going on. This scared the people living around Mariupol, and they started to flee from there because it became dangerous.
The mayor of Mariupol, Vadim Boychenko. People in possession of drugs which are used to spike drinks will now face harsher sentences. The date rape drug, GHB, along with two other related substances, have been reclassified now as Class B drugs. That means people carrying the drugs could be jailed for up to 5 years, while those involved in supply and production could face up to 14 years behind bars. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, says the changes will help improve safety. You're with GB News, more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Brazier.
6 minutes past 4. What will the history books say about today that Sweden decided to end its long-held neutrality and finally talk about joining NATO? That the President of the United States called the Russian invasion of Ukraine an act of genocide, perhaps? Well, the pages of history will not recall the intervention of one Nigel Mills, the Tory member for Amber Valley, who became the first Conservative MP to call on Boris Johnson to resign over what we are calling, of course, Partygate. What must foreign nations make of Britain right now? Days after our Prime Minister emerged as a standard bearer, in the eyes of some, for the West, walking heroically alongside Volodymyr Zelensky in Kiev, he faces calls to resign here at home. Joining me, Brendan O'Neill, the chief political writer for Spiked Online. Brendan, welcome to you. Very good afternoon to you. I think we know how some foreign nationals will respond to this, with incredulity, incomprehension. There'll be others, though, maybe in this country, who'll say, we set a fantastic example for democracy. Which is it?
I think we need to get this into perspective. I am now officially bored of Partygate. I think it's taking up too much time, too much energy. We're focusing on it far too much, to the exclusion of issues that are much more important. And we need to get it into perspective. You know, Boris Johnson allegedly went to a party for a few minutes. He sang happy birthday, or people sang happy birthday to him. They had some cake. They might have had a glass of wine in the Downing Street garden. This is not the Profumo affair. This is not Watergate. We're not talking about some mafioso-style criminality. And we really do need to get it in perspective and recognise that there are far more important issues in the world than this.
If that recognition is necessary, Brendan, who needs to do the recognising? Is it journalists who send to scalp? Is it politicians who want him gone, perhaps replaced by somebody more in keeping with their inclinations? Who's setting the running on this?
I think the media are doing a lot of the running on this, and they've been gunning for Boris for quite a long time. I think the Remainer elites in general are really stirring up Partygate, because this is a politicised scandal now. It is being used not just to punish Boris and Rishi for breaking the rules, which they did, and that's a bad thing to have done, but also to punish Boris for being pro-Brexit, for simply being Boris Johnson, for being a Conservative in Downing Street, and for being a Conservative in Downing Street who got Brexit done. That's why some people are pushing this as hard as they can. You know, Lord Adonis made it pretty clear when he said, if Boris goes, Brexit goes. So there is a political agenda behind Partygate. And I don't like the way in which this scandal is being whipped up, almost to undermine the democratic process. 14 million people voted Boris Johnson into power. That ought to count for something, even in the face of these fixed penalty notices.
And as you say, Brendan, there is an opportunity cost, as the economists call it. If you are talking about this, there's the other basket of stuff you're not talking about. What should we be talking about right now instead of Partygate?
There is so much. I mean, firstly, there's Ukraine, the crisis in Ukraine, and Boris has done a pretty good job of supporting the Ukrainian resistance, which I think is essential that Britain does that. There's the cost of living crisis. There's the fuel crisis. There's the fact that people are not sure how to make ends meet at the moment. There are all sorts of crises swirling around post-lockdown as a result of the fuel problem, as a result of war in Europe. We have been cursed to live in interesting times, and we should be taking ourselves more seriously than this. And that raises the question for me, why is Partygate being focused on so much when there are other important issues going on? And I think it is because people want to drive the knife into Boris's back and get him out of power. They want to do what they failed to do at the ballot box, which is to ensure that Boris Johnson doesn't run this country.
I'll come back to where I started, Brendan. I think it's sometimes a useful thought exercise to try and take yourself off our small island and place yourself in another part of the world and look from afar at how it looks. The last time you saw Boris Johnson was on the streets of Kiev. He was flanked by Volodymyr Zelensky at some personal risk, walking the streets of a war-torn and embattled city, very much seen as somebody who was leading the charge when it came to Ukraine and speaking up for a particular position in a very eloquent and strong way. That's the last time you saw or Boris Johnson. That's your current vision of him. And then you look at these, in quotes, charges against him for fixed penalty notices, and you're left shaking your head in bewilderment and bafflement.
Absolutely. And people looking at Britain from outside will definitely think that. They will think, hold on, weren't we all celebrating, or some of us were celebrating, Boris Johnson going to Kyiv to show solidarity with the Ukrainian people? And now we're talking about the fact that he spent 5 or 10 minutes in the cabinet room having a birthday cake. I mean, it is completely surreal. I thought there was a lot of sneering and cynicism about Boris's visit to Ukraine, which I thought was completely unwarranted. It was a good thing to do. It was right to show the solidarity of the British people with the Ukrainian people. And these are the kinds of things we should be talking about. But there is this bit of a witch hunt now brewing around Boris Johnson. And my basic point is I'm now more concerned about the response to Partygate than I am by Partygate itself, because the response looks increasingly small-minded, anti-democratic and vengeful, and we should be concerned about that.
Brendan, as ever, thanks very much indeed. Brendan O'Neill there. Sarah Elliott alongside me to ponder on today's news stories, and we'll start with that one. And I'm sure if I'd given him a little bit longer, Brendan would have made the point that the problem with being obsessed about the reaction to Partygate, not Partygate, is that you have a corrosive effect on trust in the mainstream media. People who consume it start to doubt where it's coming from. What are the motives? Why are they obsessing about this particular story and therefore by default ignoring others?
Exactly. I mean, I think one of the biggest faults of legacy media is the omission of stories that we need to focus on. We need to focus on, why do we have such high levels of inflation? Why is it the highest since 1992? Also, can we talk about the mental health crisis? Can we go back to COVID and actually debate what our COVID policies should have been and stop ignoring it?
Hey, somebody's just been sentenced to a life tariff today for stabbing an MP to death in his surgery, which happened to be inside a church as well. We can talk about how de-radicalisation policies are not working. We could even have a discussion, if you like, about how I suspect a majority of our viewers, if not the entire British public, feel that actually locking somebody up for life at taxpayers' expense is a pretty dumb idea. Let's reconsider the death penalty. I don't agree with that. You don't agree with that either.
Right.
But it's a conversation we could have.
Yeah, and how about we've just passed without debate that women can have abortions up to 11 weeks at home by themselves without medical attention. That's a child that's has a beating heart and brain waves. I mean, these are serious things out there, and we can't just scuff them under the rug because they make us uncomfortable. We need to have that dialogue and transparency. And honestly, Americans keep texting me and going, wait, the guy who brought you Brexit, you want to take him out because he had cake with his friends, or not even with his friends, his co-workers or his wife. They find it very odd.
Well, there was incomprehension, back in, 1990, when Margaret Thatcher was ousted just as the Gulf War was in.
Yes.
We were in the grip of the first Gulf War, and from the outside, people just were absolutely bamboozled by this. You've got this incredibly strong leader. OK, they weren't following every twist and turn of domestic UK politics. How could they? But they were puzzled by this idea that we could be looking to eject a strong world leader. You could say the same thing about Churchill in 45.
Yes. Exactly. And I think she was at an event to honor the fall of the Iron Curtain and the end of communism, which she helped bring about. And then she finds out that she's being ejected. Yeah, so I think the rest of the world thinks it's a bit of comedy hour, and we probably should move on.
Yeah, I think they find it eccentric.
Yes.
It's not an example of the cockpit of the nation and the mother of democracies. It's just eccentric. Anyway.
But the English are.
The British.
The British.
Thank you, Sarah.
Sorry.
This is GB News. Britain's rate of inflation last month rose to 7%, a 30-year high. What might it mean for you? The Director of Communications at the Institute of Economic Affairs is Annabelle Denham, who joins me down the line now. She has often joined us here in the studio, but she's taking it easy today. Annabelle, welcome to you. 7% is a headline figure, and it will speak to the anxiety a lot of people feel, consumers, but also those running businesses, thinking, how much of my cost do I now pass on to my customers? It will be provoking anxiety.
Well, it will indeed. And of course, Colin, it's going to get worse before it gets better. We are going to have inflation in the high single digits well into next year. It could even hit double digits. Of course, this figure of 7% in March is a textbook example of too much money facing too few goods and services. We had first this global rebound, very quick global rebound, quicker than people were expecting after the pandemic. And the pandemic itself had disrupted and choked supply chains. Now we've got the war in Ukraine, creating all sorts of problems with global supply. But the underlying cause, Colin, and we mustn't forget this, is the huge amount of new money that has been pumped into the global economy by central banks, particularly, though not exclusively, in the last 2 years. It's very tempting to attribute that surge in inflation to whichever prices happen to be increasing the most, particularly energy and food. And you're right to point out that this affects businesses just as much as it affects consumers. Too often we focus on the latter. But generally, this narrative risks letting the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee off the hook. Let's not forget that the MPC is supposed to keep inflation at 2%. And the Bank of England really has paid far too little attention, if any at all, to this extraordinary increase in the growth in the amount of money, particularly in 2020 and 2021.
I tell you what, Annabelle, I'm going to give our viewers a warning and listeners a warning. This might be the moment they want to go and make a cup of tea for a couple of minutes because it risks being slightly pointy-headed. I make no apology for that. We were just talking about 1990, the twilight days of Margaret Thatcher. And I'm minded, back in the early 10 years before that, 1980, Geoffrey Howe, I think at the time, was the Chancellor. And it was the first time it had really been attempted on a nationwide level, this idea that Britain was going to become a laboratory for monetarism, this wacky idea pioneered in Chicago by a bunch of very pointy-headed academics that you need to target money supply. If there's too much money floating around an economy, inflation will be the consequence. I know it's very dry and academic, but right now it feels quite real.
Well, it does, absolutely. I mean, let's not forget that in April 2021, the growth in the amount of money reached a high of 15.2%. We need to be bringing that down to under 5% if we are striving for price stability. So yes, you're right. We've had this long period of too loose monetary policy. And the consequence of that, like I said at the start, is that we are going to have inflation that remains high for at least the rest of this year, if not longer. Now, that's the government, the Bank of England itself is limited in what it's now able to do. Of course, it can raise interest rates to more sensible levels than we've seen in the last couple of decades or so. But that could risk exacerbating the cost of living crisis. That would be a move that would certainly be unpopular among certain groups. But there are things that the government can and should be doing to protect the most vulnerable from the cost of living crisis and to ease supply side constraints in areas like housing and childcare. Politicians give us the crocodile tears when it comes to the cost of living crisis, while forgetting the many interventions that it's been responsible for that have driven up the cost of living for many people.
Annabelle, can I hazard blasphemy here and just wonder out loud whether there are any upsides to a 7% inflation rate? Might it be that if actually it leads to wage bargaining by people who have been undervalued by the economy? We're sending loads of people to university now. The people who are doing the jobs that nobody else wants to do are dwindling in number. Might we have a situation where actually we force up their wages, and that might be a good thing? As prices rise, so do some wages for some neglected parts of the economy.
Well, I think we can very quickly get into an inflationary spiral if we have that mindset. And of course, let's not forget, Colin, that a couple of months ago, the government of the Bank of England was warning people not to ask for pay rises because he had this precise fear. I'd be wary of making the point that higher inflation means higher wages. Let's not forget that real wage growth is due to stagnate. People are going to feel the effects of inflation in their pockets. They're going to have lower purchasing power than they have in recent years. It may be that down the line it allows people to negotiate higher wages, but let's not forget that those will be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. So you'll have higher wages leading to higher prices, leading to higher wages as people's purchasing power dwindles, leading to higher wages. And you can see quickly how you get into a pretty nasty inflationary spiral if that's the case.
OK, Annabelle, we're going to leave it there. We're out of time, but really appreciate yours today, as ever. Annabelle Denham there from the IEA. Sarah Elliott, alongside me, was nodding, I sense, from my peripheral vision when I was invoking, I didn't say his name, Milton Friedman.
I know, you're a Chicago guy. I was very
No, I'm
impressed.
not. I'm not saying I agree with that. I've just observed it happened.
Yes, yes. Well, and Milton Friedman was right on a lot of things, and that's what made the 1980s so special between Reagan and Thatcher, is that their economic advisors were completely on side when it came to supply-side economics. But, I mean, the common denominator I see through all of this, how we got here today, is government. You know, why are we experiencing such high inflation? You know, it's government spending. And what was that government spending for? That was for lockdown and furlough, because the government shut us down. And so, you know, my response is, let's get government out of the way. Let's cut the appetite of government. Let's be honest with ourselves as citizens of this country and say, okay, you need to take some personal responsibility. You know, you have to find a work ethic, and that will relieve the pressure on the market. And we need to talk about why competition is good, why the marketplace is the answer with the invisible hand.
But you come from a country where people only get 2 weeks holiday a year.
I know.
You know.
I have to tell you, when I first moved here and someone said I'll be back in 3 weeks in August, I was like, who works in this country? Who's going to answer my question?
Sarah, for now, on that note, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, the Islamist who murdered an MP smirked and winked as he was sentenced to life today. Our security editor, Mark White, saw events unfold. He'll talk to me and you. And first, the weather.
Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, the Islamist terrorist who murdered Sir David Amess will spend the rest of his life in jail. The judge today said that Ali Harbi Ali showed no remorse or shame as he handed him a whole life sentence for killing the Conservative MP last October. Let's turn to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's at the Old Bailey. Mark, welcome to you. This is a defendant who's shown contempt for the judicial process, wouldn't stand for his verdict, and today smirked, we're told, and winked as he was led from the court.
Yes, that arrogance and that defiance and that complete lack of any regret for his actions was very apparent in court number 2 here at the Old Bailey today, as he refused initially to stand in the dock as the judge, Mr. Justice Sweeney, passed that whole life sentence. And as you say then, of course, as he was led from the dock off to prison to begin that sentence, he smirked at those in court, just adding insult to injury, of course, for the family and friends of Sir David Amess. And we heard briefly in a statement from Sir David's family today about the way that they have been dealing with the loss of their loved one, and they say that they're heartbroken to think that Sir David would have greeted Ali Harbi Ali at this constituency surgery in Leigh-on-Sea on the 15th of October last year with a smile of friendship, and would have been only too willing to do what he could to help this young man. Instead, of course, Ali Harbi Ali produced this foot-long knife and stabbed the MP to death. We also heard a victim impact statement from Julie Cushing, who was the constituency assistant to Sir David Amess. And she said that she passes this parish church, this Baptist church, I should say, in Leigh-on-Sea, pretty much every day as she lives nearby, and it reminds her of the horrific events that day. And she herself, she says, feels so terribly guilty about what happened, because she booked that constituency surgery in that particular venue on that day. As she said, she'll never forget the screams coming from Sir David as he was attacked, and then also the look on Ali Harbi Ali's face, similar to the look that he gave today, that look of smugness and self-satisfied look as he left in police custody at that time.
Mark, sad to say, for both of us, we've talked about many of these Islamist terror atrocities over the years now. How do we stop this individual entering the British penal system and spreading his poisonous ideology? Can he be kept in solitary confinement? If we sentenced him for life for committing a crime which in many countries would have resulted in the death penalty, we're going to keep him alive for decades at taxpayers' expense. At least we, I suppose, ought to have the contentment of the knowledge that he's not spreading his ideology with others.
It's a real difficult one, this, for the authorities, Colin, because those individuals who are being held on terrorism charges in jail number in the hundreds, and while certain individuals, such as the hate preacher Anjem Chowdhury, when he was sent to Belmarsh prison, for much of the time that he was in there, measures were taken to try to keep him as much as possible away from other people that he might influence or radicalise. But the fact is, with hundreds of terrorist prisoners in prison, it's just not practical to hold them all in some kind of segregated unit, because there just isn't the room to be able to do that, and the staff to keep an eye on them all individually. So they are often mixing together, and the potential is there for radicalisation, for them to pass on that ideology to others. We know that radicalisation happens in prison. It is an issue they've been grappling with for many years and have never really solved it.
Well, Mark, I'm going to be talking to Ian Atchison, as a former prison governor, who's got strong opinions about this in the next hour. But for now, Mark, thanks very much indeed. Mark White there at the Old Bailey. Sarah Elliott's alongside me. We were talking at the top of the hour about stories we ought to be talking about, rather, said Brendan O'Neill of Spiked, than Partygate. Here's one. Here's a really difficult subculture. People don't really want to understand it. It's something we contract out to the prison service and the wonderful people who work as prison guards. for relatively little cash and deal with these people that none of us really would like to run into on a daily basis. They do. Let's talk about that. What do we do with these people instead?
Yeah, I mean, they're human beings. They have dignity in and of themselves. They've committed horrible crimes, but especially in this country, most of them do get out at some point. They don't tend to live a whole life sentence.
He's not getting out, but in prison he may be able to talk to other people
who will get out. Exactly, and that's the problem. And this is why Prevent, who actually did talk to Ali at some point, needs to do a better job. Of the last, I think, terrorist attacks of the past 5 years, of the 11 criminals who did those terrorists, 5 of them had been talked to by Prevent. So obviously we can identify them, but we need a better way of preventing them from carrying out these attacks.
Sarah Fenno, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, does the public, it's putting that question again, does the public really care about Partygate? We'll try and put that through some kind of measuring device. We'll speak to a polling expert about how the public have reacted to the PM getting fined. Lord Hayward will join me. First, let's bring you up to date with the rest of the day's news with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The top stories. The Prime Minister has welcomed a whole life sentence for the terrorist who murdered the Conservative MP Sir David Amess. Boris Johnson says we must never allow acts of evil to triumph over democracy. Passing sentence, the judge said in the case, Ali Harbi Ali had shown no remorse or shame for killing Sir David last October. In other news, households are feeling the pinch as the cost of food essentials rose sharply last month. The price of bread and butter shot up along with other staples like milk and cooking oil. The cost of a new loaf is now over 5% more than it was a year ago. Overall inflation jumped to 7% in the year to March. The Prime Minister's position has been described as untenable by a Tory backbencher. Nigel Mills is calling for Boris Johnson's resignation. That comes after Mr Johnson, his wife and Rishi Sunak were fined by police for breaching COVID rules when they attended the Prime Minister's birthday party during lockdown. They've all apologised and confirmed the fines have been paid. The people suspected of leaking CCTV footage of the former Health Secretary and his aide kissing in his office won't be prosecuted. The video, which led to Matt Hancock's resignation, showed him embracing Gina Coladangelo while social distancing rules were in place. The Information Commissioner's officers concluded the evidence is insufficient to charge anyone. And the UK is sanctioning 178 Russian separatists for propping up breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine. The move has been coordinated with the European Union. That comes as Moscow's bombardment of Ukraine continues. In his latest address, the Ukrainian president, Mr Zelensky, said Russia is using phosphorus bombs against his country. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Stay with us. Brazier is back in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Nearly 25 minutes to 5. It's that question again, I'm afraid. I make no apology for it, because I'm going to be talking to somebody who's been looking at the numbers that mean something, really. Here's the question. Will Boris Johnson survive Partygate? Many of you think the media is unreasonably obsessed with the story. It might have been acceptable to discuss unseating a sitting PM a couple of months ago, but not now. Europeans are dying every day at the hands of an invading army and at the behest of a man who wishes the West harm. Well, in a moment, the polls, but first, a reminder. Boris Johnson apologised yesterday as he said he fell short of his own COVID rules.
You want to be able to get on and deliver the mandate.
Well, in a statement, the PM rejected demands to quit, but said, "I accept in all sincerity that people have the right to expect better." The Chancellor, after several hours of radio silence, released his own statement, saying, "I deeply regret the frustration and anger caused, and I'm sorry. Like the Prime Minister, I am focused on delivering for the British people." It doesn't say what he's going to be delivering for the British people at this challenging time. Let's turn to the pollster and Conservative peer, Lord Robert Hayward, who joins us now. Lord Hayward, thanks for your time. What are the polls telling us?
The snap polls say that both Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak should resign. Having said that, snap polls are notoriously unreliable. They don't feed through into ongoing monthly or quarterly polls. The most recent example being the Spring Statement, which got a general thumbs down on the first 2 days after the Spring Statement, but actually didn't impact on the Tory position in the polls hardly at all.
When we move away from the snap polls and look at the broader picture, I'm guessing the broader picture tells one of recovering fortunes, at least to some degree, for the Prime Minister through his handling of the Ukraine crisis.
That is the case. There's no question that since about mid-February, the position of the Prime Minister, in terms of favourability, has been improving. But one doesn't know whether the announcement yesterday will have an impact on the polls overall or just on the snap polls. His favourability is still, however, quite a long way short of what it was back in October, November.
Still, a couple of years away from the next general election, though, aren't we? Plenty of time for his personal ratings to improve. What do the polls tell us about those who might be king, in particular Rishi Sunak's?
Rishi Sunak's favourability has plunged quite dramatically over the last few weeks because of the Spring Statement, then the disclosure about his personal and his wife's tax position, and now apparently in relation to the fines, the best expectation will be that his position has deteriorated very dramatically indeed.
Robert Hayward, just offer us a perspective, less as a pollster, but more as somebody, parliamentarian. We were talking in the last half an hour about how this looks from outside and how peculiar it looks, really, viewed from a different prism, from a different vantage point. If you are somebody outside of the UK looking in, you saw the Prime Minister, and as you say, to some degree, the polls are reflecting this, on the streets of Kiev with Volodymyr Zelensky at the weekend, an heroic gesture, if you're a fan of his, just a piece of photo gimmickry, if you're more of a cynic. But it's undeniably true, isn't it, that I'm sure if you conducted polls in France or America or Australia and said, Boris Johnson right now, he'd be much more recognisable than many other world leaders, and he would be seen as something of a standard bearer for the West. It's always the way, isn't it? You just craft a question perfectly and the line goes dead. Here's Sarah Elliott to reflect on that question. Can you answer it?
Yeah, I mean, that's what befuddles Americans. They're kind of like, this is a very recognizable statesman now. He's been in office for over 2 years. They all remember Boris he almost died of COVID in hospital, intensive care. But yeah, you do have a lot of statesman-like world leader photographs. He's been to several G7s. He hosted COP. You know, do you really want to take this guy out? But I think the reason that, you know, Partygate was such a big deal back in February was because that was the straw to break the camel's back. It was, for the Tories, he was raising NI, it was all environmental policies, you know, net zero, there was lobbying scandals. All of this was building up in the autumn and really kind of annoying people. And of course, vaccine passports and that sort of thing. And then you had Partygate where, clearly the Prime Minister doesn't care. And so I think that's why people were so angry at that time, but so much has happened since.
Just before Lord Hayward was cut off in his prime there, we were getting into Rishi Sunak's approval ratings. You think he's finished?
I think it looks like that way. I think it's very likely. It's hard to rebound from something like this. You know, politics is all about perception. And here is a guy who clearly is quite wealthy, and now he and his wife seem quite out of touch.
Can I ask you something as an American living in the UK, briefly before we move on to another story, about patriotism?
Yes.
Because I think, and I was talking to someone about this the other day, if Rishi Sunak had become Prime Minister, as many people felt was likely and desirable, there would then, I think, have been bigger questions about how committed to the UK he was. I mean, clearly he's a politician of enormous talents, but to only relinquish his green card for America in October, and even, you know, it's sensitive territory this, but to be married to an Indian national who had retained Indian nationality, this is the Prime Minister potentially we're talking about, the de facto leader of our country. Does any of that stuff matter as a foreigner living here?
Yes, I mean, well, for me, I kind of think, well, does the green card jeopardize any kind of security clearance? You know, as an American, are you really, are you allowed, you know, to hear what you hear or be privy to what you're privy to? I think in terms of his wife, you know, it's not so much that she's Indian, you know, that's not the issue. It's the fact that...
Well, it is slightly, because India is currently quite aligned with Vladimir Putin.
Well, with that aspect, but where I think it gets complicated is that she comes from a very affluent family that's tied in.
It's not her fault.
No, but she's tied in with this tech company in Moscow. She's been non-dom. Clearly they don't experience the tightening and the inflationary pressures that everyday British people are experiencing today, and I think that's what probably actually makes him unrelatable and unelectable.
Have a look if you can, do take part in, if you will, our poll on this one right now. It's about how this is viewed from abroad, and there's 1,400 people have voted so far. It's just gone up. Have a look on my Twitter feed for that. We're going to move on to a different type of story now. Health officials are investigating a total of 74 cases of hepatitis in children across the UK since the start of this year. It's a condition that causes liver swelling. Officials are examining 49 cases in England, 13 in Scotland, and 12 across Wales and Northern Ireland. The UK Health Security Agency said parents should be on the lookout for symptoms such as jaundice. Let's turn to Dr. Ethan Smallwood, who can ponder on this one for us now. Doctor, welcome to you and appreciate your time. What do you make of this?
Yeah, so I think if we just give a bit of a breakdown of the article, as you said, there's been a spike in hepatitis cases, children under the age of 10. One of the lines of inquiry is into adenoviruses. So generally they cause mild infections, you know, colds, diarrhea, vomiting, but there is a rare complication, hepatitis, which is inflammation of the liver. And we just need to be aware really of those symptoms that can be, sort of result of hepatitis.
Do you draw any conclusions from the fact, Ethan, that this is spread fairly liberally across the entire country? Don't appear to be any obvious hot spots. It's not just confined to Scotland or Wales or parts of the southeast of England. And is there anything within the data that we've seen that suggests there could be a link with COVID?
Yeah, I think to the first question, there's nothing that I could really draw from that in particular. In terms of the COVID link, so none of these children, the 74 cases, have had a dose of the coronavirus vaccine. So I think that's good reassurance for parents and for children as well.
In terms of symptoms that parents ought to look out for, I mean, heaven knows it's tough for parents trying to diagnose their children's ailments, which can often be conflicting and not what they seem to be. What's the advice medically?
Okay, yeah, so we can go through some of the key symptoms of hepatitis. So muscle and joint pain, a high temperature, feeling of being sick, tummy pain, a symptom called jaundice, where you get yellowing of the eyes and skin. You can also find a full symptom list on the NHS website if you are worried as well.
Ethan Smallwood, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Sarah Elliott alongside me. There's still a lot that we sense that we need to find out about COVID and other effects of the virus directly or indirectly, because perhaps other elements of healthcare were neglected or people's behaviours were changed in such a way that then other things got a hold.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had a daughter on lockdown day itself, and I've had to go to the A&E twice now with her, where she's had 3 viruses at the same time, respiratory viruses. And they're finding now with lockdown babies and children, because now they're 2, they can hold up to 5 viruses at one time. And this is something they've never seen before. So my daughter had 3 viruses and a bacterial infection 2 weekends in a row. She was affected by this. And ironically, even today, I was checking her breathing. Something's not right. So great, I have one more thing to worry about. I have to check for jaundice, eyes, and skin now. But I think that there is a side effect that, even though I feel my daughter was well socialized because she has an older sibling, and we did make efforts in a childcare bubble, their immune systems, they weren't passed around by families as babies. They weren't seeing aunts, uncles, friends, and they weren't going to the playgrounds as much. So, you know, I think this is a long-term side effect we're going to see from this generation.
Interesting. Emails on that one is an interesting subject, isn't it? Sarah, thanks very much indeed for now. Coming up, I'm going to be talking to a dairy farmer who's struggling to keep up with rising prices. It's not just we consumers who are affected. Many producers are affected as well. Let's bring you the weather now, though.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Some heavy showers around today. They'll be fading through the evening and overnight, and for most, it's looking like a dry and a bright day to come tomorrow. Low pressure near to the northeast of Scotland, bringing some pretty wet and cold weather across the far northeast, but elsewhere it's been by and large fine. But we have seen some big showers developing across central and southern parts of England and southern parts of Wales. Those heavy downpours still continuing for the next few hours before steadily fading away through this evening, and most places dry from midnight onwards. The wet weather in the far northeast also starting to ease. It is going to turn murky and misty across the south in particular, and temperatures dropping down to the mid-single figures. On to Thursday, and it will by and large be a dry and a bright day, but it is going to start pretty grey across the Midlands, South Wales, southern England. It may take a while before that cloud clears away. Quite cloudy too over Northern Ireland and western Scotland. A little bit of drizzly rain is possible at times here. It could be quite wet in the Western Isles, but for the vast majority, it is going to be a dry day, and it'll probably brighten up quite a bit as well. So some places seeing some sunshine, and temperatures responding to that sunshine as well. The warmest weather across eastern England, 2021, elsewhere generally mid to high teens. A bit more of that patchy rain, just fringing into the highlands at times through the nights, but otherwise, again, it's generally going to be a dry night with clear spells. Again, turning a little misty in some spots, and we'll see maybe a bit of showery rain just clipping the west of Wales, southwest England as we head into Good Friday. 1 or 2 showers across northern Scotland too, but again, for most Good Friday, dry and fine. Probably a sunnier day, certainly over the Midlands, parts of eastern England and northwest Scotland. Plenty of sunshine, and temperatures again responding to that sunshine, maybe up to the low 20s across the southeast. A little cooler perhaps on some North Sea coasts, and that could be a feature into Saturday as well. But for the Easter weekend, many places dry with some sunshine, turning cooler, a bit wetter by Monday.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I've got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. We can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it? I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat. Every weekday at 1, you're On the Money.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Seven and a half minutes to 5 o'clock. Now, behind the statistics of inflation busting through the 7% mark lie stories of hardship and difficult choices, not just for consumers, but producers too. Dairy farmers, for instance, have to decide whether to absorb massive rises in the costs they face or pass them on to us, the customers. Joining me now is dairy farmer Matthew Robinson, who is, well, grappling with some of those problems right now, I imagine. Matthew, very warm welcome to you. Thanks for your time. Dairy farmers have been struggling for years, haven't they? But these new increases in things like feed costs and the price of diesel must be really hurting.
Yeah, good afternoon, Colin. Yeah, they are really hurting a lot. I mean, we've obviously tried to control our costs of production over sort of many years, but these sudden and dramatic increases have certainly made a difference, and they're certainly really challenging us at the moment. That is a fact.
Is there one in particular that's really hit you, Matthew? I mean, for instance, red diesel. I mean, people think, oh, farmers get their diesel cheaply, but you're getting through, 5 miles a gallon in a tractor, and you need to be running around a bit.
Yeah. Diesel's a huge has had a huge impact on us, but probably more so than that. Probably the fertilizer and the feed. The feed costs are probably just as important. I mean, I think from a feed perspective, milk volumes are sort of continue to drop around sort of 3-4%. So the incentive that we need to sort of increase more milk. To increase more milk is to get a better milk price, but that ratio between milk price and feed costs are really stretching us. I mean, feed now from probably May the 1st is looking around sort of late 300s, even over £400 a tonne. So we equate that back to a sort of a milk price to make it viable for us to increase volumes. We've got to be looking at around sort of 48. Possibly even 50p a litre. And at the moment, our price is set to increase on May the 1st to 40p a litre. So although that's very welcome, we're obviously looking for more increases as well, because we know that feed and energy costs and fuel costs are going to continue to go, unfortunately, in the wrong direction.
Matthew, I'll just clarify for our viewers who are looking at a sow suckling her piglets. Yes, it's about milk, but not the sort of milk we're talking about. There's talk perhaps of butter going up to the sort of £2 mark, 50% increase in the price of milk in the supermarkets. I mean, we know the supermarkets, some in particular, have really screwed dairy farmers to the floor with what they're prepared to pay. Are they showing a little bit more leniency now?
Well, yeah, I mean, thankfully they are. I think sort of looking at our contract compared to farmers with aligned contracts, supermarket contracts, they've always, historically, they've always been sort of 6-8p a litre ahead of what we've been able to get. Now, obviously, the last 3 or 4 weeks, 3 or 4 months, that they've actually been below our price. They've obviously been paid sort of 3 or 4 pence a litre below what we've been paid, basically because supermarkets have refused to put the milk price up on the shelves, and they've been sort of giving notice to leave their supplies. But thankfully now I think I hear over the last couple of days that prices in shops and supermarkets are set to rise. So hopefully that should stop that trend. But it does need sort of, unfortunately, it needs increases in the shops and the supermarkets to make a difference to what we produce and how we produce it.
Matthew, just a final brief thought on food security. Do you think, are you bumping into more people now who get it, who have heard actually the reality of the fact that we only produce about half the food we consume in this country? And in a world post-COVID where people have seen what can happen to very fragile supply chains, maybe we need to address that.
Well, definitely. I mean, I think this is probably the most important thing of all. In an age where we're looking to having to import more and more of our food, and the incentive seems to be from the government to take, unfortunately, to be taking productive land out of production. So less food is going to be able to come from, obviously, from the UK. We need to look to be keeping that land in production in the hope that we can produce all the food that we need. Obviously, we're going to suffer. We're not going to be able to produce everything. But from a policy point of view, with the current Elm situation and whatever that's going to happen in the future, if that policy persists and potentially thousands of acres are going to be taken out of productive land, is going to be taken out of food production, it's going to get worse. And we've got to rely on our own farmers, our own producers, to produce land within these shores without having to have the increased vulnerability of having it brought in from abroad, because transport and everything else, air miles, what everyone seems to be talking about, it's just going to increase in price. And if we can try and produce more and more from what our own land and whatever, it has to be a good thing. But policy has to change, and if it doesn't, then I think it's going to be worrying time for all of us.
Yeah, and Matthew, ELM is environmental land management, isn't it? This is the government paying you money to, say, plant trees and take productive land out of use. Just that's what it stands for, isn't it?
Right, yes, it is. But again, from a financial point of view, it just, from our point of view, from our own personal farm point of view, and from a majority of farm, it just doesn't make economic sense to do it. It cannot pay. It cannot relate to the same payment as what we're going to end up losing through the single farm payment.
Trees may be good for the environment, but they don't feed people, do they? Matthew, we've got to leave it there, but really appreciate your time today. Thanks ever so much. Matthew Robinson, who's a dairy farmer. Sarah Elliott's alongside me, just to reflect on that point about food security. I think the penny's dropping, isn't it?
Yeah, I think definitely the pandemic made people think about where our food comes from and the effects of global pandemics or just globalization in general. Coming from the United States, we have a lot of resources and a lot of land, and we don't ever think of scarcity, But I do see a difference living here on an island where there are limits, and there are limits to resources. And, I fully back, the British farmer and any endeavor to be independent and self-sufficient. So I think the government should encourage that, but I will stop at subsidization to a certain level. We have, again, getting government involved. It's a balance.
Yeah. Food's pretty important, then.
And
isn't it?
food is
Okay.
pretty important.
Sarah, for now, thanks very much indeed. It is 5 o'clock. And coming up this live at 5, with Ukraine in flames and talk of World War III, could it only be in Britain where a row over parties and cake threatens to unseat a politician who increasingly speaks for the free world? As the Islamist killer of David Amos smiles and smirks as he gets a life sentence, how did he convince de-radicalisation experts that he posed no threat? And £13 million, the amount of compensation paid out to motorists whose vehicles were damaged by potholes. Yes, potholes on Britain's roads. Alongside me throughout today's show, the US-UK commentator Sarah Elliott. But first, the headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Just after 5 o'clock, the headlines this hour. The Prime Minister has welcomed the whole life sentence handed down to the terrorist who murdered the Conservative MP, Sir David Amos. Boris Johnson said we must never allow acts of evil to triumph over democracy. Passing sentence, the judge in the case said Ali Harbi Ali had showed no remorse or shame for killing Sir David last October. Met Police Assistant Commissioner Matt Jukes read out a statement on behalf of the MP's family.
There is no elation in our family today following this sentencing. Our amazing husband and father has been taken from us in an appalling and violent manner. Nothing will ever compensate for that. We will wake each day and immediately feel our loss. We will struggle through each day for the rest of our lives. It breaks our heart to know that our husband and father would have greeted the murderer with a smile of friendship and would have been anxious to help. How sickening to think what happened next. It is beyond evil.
In consumer news, households are feeling the pinch as the cost of food essentials rose sharply again last month. The price of bread and butter shot up along with other staples like milk and cooking oil. The cost of a loaf of bread is now over 5% more than it was a year ago. Overall inflation jumped to 7% in the year to March. Finance analyst at Hargreaves Lansdown, Sarah Coles, says the cost of living is going to get worse.
April, we're going to get the impact of the energy price cap hike, which is really going to push things up. So we're about 7% in March, is expected to go up to about 8% in April. So that's going to be even more painful. And then it's likely to go up again in October. So the Office for Budget Responsibility is sort of looking at sort of around about 9% in the sort of last quarter of the year. So whilst things are tough now, they're actually going to get increasingly tough throughout the rest of the year.
Sarah Coles. The Prime Minister's position has been described as untenable by a Tory backbencher. MP Nigel Mills is calling for Boris Johnson's resignation. That comes after Mr Johnson, his wife and Rishi Sunak were fined by police for breaching COVID rules when they attended the Prime Minister's birthday party in lockdown. They've all apologised and confirmed the fines have been paid. Conservative Scottish leader Douglas Ross told GBNews Boris Johnson needs to focus on the job at hand, despite calling for his resignation at the start of the year.
About the Prime Minister in January, because I thought his actions were unacceptable. Now that the fixed penalty notice has been issued and accepted and paid by the Prime Minister, I still believe that, and I share the anger and the fury that many people have about this. But I can't also ignore the situation in Ukraine, where we've heard President Zelensky single out Boris Johnson as being one of the leaders in the West that has done most to help him and his people defend their country and their freedom.
Well, reflecting on Ukraine, the UK is sanctioning 178 Russian separatists for propping up breakaway regions in the east of the country. The move has been coordinated with the European Union. That comes as Moscow's bombardment of the country continues, with the mayor of Mariupol again accusing Russian troops of using chemical weapons in the region.
The day before yesterday, Russian troops attempted to strike our city with a so-called chemical attack. They tried to drop a chemical agent on our defenders. The agent affected some of them, and there's evidence a number of people living in settlements around the outskirts of Mariupol were also affected. They had a taste in their mouth which warned them that something was going on. This scared the people living around Mariupol, and they started to flee from there because it became dangerous.
The mayor of Mariupol speaking there. In the United States, a manhunt is still underway in New York following yesterday's shooting at a subway station in Brooklyn. 62-year-old Frank James has been identified as a suspect. He was seen fleeing the area after smoke bombs were detonated inside tube carriages. 10 people were directly hit by gunfire. 5 are in a critical but stable condition. 13 other people were injured. In the UK, people in possession of drugs which are used to spike drinks will now face harsher sentences. The date rape drug GHB, along with 2 other related substances, have been reclassified as Class B drugs. That means people carrying the drugs could be jailed for up to 5 years, while those involved in supply and production could face up to 14 years behind bars. You're watching GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Brazier.
Now, the Islamist murderer Ali Harbi Ali is beginning a minimum 30-year sentence in prison today. It's likely to be a full life sentence, in fact, as he was led from the court. He smirked and he winked at the gallery, as well he might. In many countries, he'd now be facing the death penalty rather than the relative comfort of the British penal system. But perhaps that smirk is prompted by something else, the knowledge that you and I, the British taxpayer, will be paying for a proven terrorist to take his hate-fuelled ideology into prisons, where he'll potentially be able to indoctrinate other inmates at our largesse. This is, after all, a young man who has shown an adeptness at gaming the system to the jihadists' advantage. Before he murdered an MP, he successfully convinced a de-radicalisation programme that he posed no meaningful threat to the general public. Well, joining me now is Ian Aitchison, a former prison governor and senior advisor at the Counter-Extremism Project. Ian Aitchison, thanks so much for your time. I do appreciate it, and your expertise as a former prison governor too. What kind of conditions do you expect someone like this prisoner to be held in, and to what extent do you think he'll be able to contaminate others with his worldview?
Well, Colin, thanks for having me on, first of all. And can I just extend my sympathy to Sir David Amy's family, who also began a life sentence today, directly due to this narcissistic and arrogant terrorist. Clearly, with someone who's been convicted of such an outrageous crime, who has actually taken his ideological motivation to the extreme of murdering somebody, will be exceptionally risky when he goes into prison. One of the things I frequently say to audiences here, who sometimes I think could be forgiven for thinking the problem is now behind a high wall and will go away, is that certainly for ideologically motivated offenders like Islamist extremists, there are plenty of targets who are British citizens behind the walls, many of them whom, of course, men and women put on a uniform every morning and go into high security prisons to look after dangerous people like him. So I don't think the prison service will be taking any risks at all with the management of this individual. Obviously, he's been on remand for quite a considerable time before his conviction and his sentence today. So the service will have had ample opportunity to observe him. I would expect that, given the outrageous nature of his crime, and the fact that he is a jihadist who is, as I've said before, who's come through on his murderous intent, he would be probably at the extreme end of risk management. He would be a higher exceptional risk category A prisoner. You would expect him to, at least for a long period of time, where he continues to be under observation, be in some of our most secure custody inside a high security prison, like, for example, Belmarsh, which has a high security unit for very dangerous prisoners like Ahmed Hassan, the Parsons Green tube bomber, etc. But will his risk necessarily diminish now he's been sentenced and convicted? Well, that remains to be seen. Some terrorist prisoners, especially those who have carried out attacks to satisfy their twisted rationale, they will say, well, that's job done and I'm going to disappear into the background. Others who are thwarted may be more dangerous, but only time will tell whether this man can be successfully managed inside custody. He remains very much an unknown quantity, and I would expect the prison service to handle him with extreme care, certainly in the first months and possibly years of his sentence.
Again, you know far better than the vast majority of us what a topsy-turvy world, I suppose, prison is, where the normal rules of physics don't apply. In fact, in a sense, they're inverted, where somebody who's a pariah on the outside may even be venerated on the inside. I just wonder, you mentioned Belmarsh. If he were to go to Belmarsh, is there a sense in which he would enjoy sort of hero status amongst a small cadre?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think one of the reasons that I suggested in 2016, after doing a government review into Islamist extremism, that we set up separation centres, is that we need to turn people who may be charismatic, who may be, in the eyes of other credulous young men in prison for violence, susceptible to that sort of glamour, rock stars in inverted commas. We need to turn those people into ghosts, effectively. We need to completely incapacitate them from spreading their hateful ideology and their inspiration to others. So it's very important that wherever Harbi Ali ends up, he is absolutely prevented from exporting any of the dark glamour associated with his disgusting activities. I've said before, prisons are incubators of violent extremism. We have a prison system in this country, sadly, which, in many places it's hard to figure out who is in charge, whether it's prisoners or the staff. There are far too few staff, and particularly when you're dealing with ideologically motivated offenders, often they're very sophisticated and charismatic. You don't have training and expertise that is equipped to be able to manage these people safely. So, I am sure wherever he goes, he will need to be monitored very carefully. He absolutely must be prevented from capitalizing on this appalling brutality in any way at all. We have far too many people in prison, in the disordered environments that we see, unfortunately, that are all too ready to follow the lead of somebody like this. I don't know if you're interested, Colin, in talking about the prevent strategy.
We're going to save it, Ian. We're going to save it for another day. But I'm keen that we do that because, as ever, your inside experience and your perspective on this, particularly on a day, I have to say, when we're talking about the fact we're obsessing about Partygate, and we were just saying actually a moment ago that means that there are other stories, unglamorous, unrecognised stories, which don't get the attention they deserve. I would say this is a prima facie example of it. We'll talk about it some other time. But Ian, thanks so much as ever for your expertise. Thanks very much indeed, Ian Atchison there. UK inflation has hit 7%, exceeding expectations and hitting a 30-year high. We learned this morning. Many small businesses, including pubs, are struggling. They've been struggling for years, haven't they? Heating of premises is much more expensive suddenly, and everything from staff wages to cooking oil, if you can find it, and tomato ketchup, whatever it is, going up in price, eating into profits such as they are. Let's turn to publican Adam Brooks, who joins us now. Adam, hi to you. Prices are going up and you're feeling it in the pocket.
A little bit, mate. Yeah, you could say that. I mean, as you said before, pubs, we've been hit over the last few years as it is, but the inflationary pressures, as you said, every product that we need to source has gone up, and not just by 5% or 10%. So some of the products that we buy are 20% dearer, and we just can't put that price to the public. So our margins are getting hit terribly. I've said it on Twitter before, but really a lot of pints should be £7 or £8 at the moment, especially someone like myself that buys from a brewery. I'm part of a tied model, so my lease means that I have to buy off of my brewery, and we pay a lot more than if we was to go to the wholesaler. So I don't think a lot of consumers know that certain pubs are running at very, very tight margins, and we haven't got any room left really to go much higher with prices.
I was in a pub in the middle of nowhere recently where their oil, it's domestic oil that heats the place, and the price of a tank of oil, of domestic heating oil, has gone up by a factor far greater than what's coming through your pipes. So their fuel bill was simply astronomical, absolutely astronomical. They took some comfort from the fact we're heading into spring, so actually it's not as cold as it could be. But that, more than anything else, I'm imagining, I mean, you're seeing, you know, the packet of crisps are going up, the food's going up, but actually it's heating costs, lights, but heating especially.
The energy crisis has hit me, certainly in one pub. I'm still in contract with one of my other pubs, so it's not hit me as bad, but I've got a small backstreet pub that I'm now paying £3,000 a month electricity alone. You know, £700-800 a month gas, sort of, you know, £300-400 a month water. You're looking at £50,000 a year utilities.
Wow.
It's unsustainable.
And people will say, well, Adam could turn some of the lights down or turn the heating down. It isn't that simple, is it?
No, I mean, you know, I must have 20 fridges at this pub. I've got beer cellar cooling equipment. I've got air conditioning, certain things that you can't do without, ice machines that have to run through the night. You know, so you can cut down certain parts, but it's not even going to touch the sides, Colin.
Adam Brooks is a publican, and like many, he's struggling with inflation right now. Adam, thanks for sharing your story as ever. Thanks a lot. Sarah Elliott's alongside me. Are you a pub goer?
Oh, I love a pub. I love an Irish pub.
What, £7 a pint is what we should be paying? Was it?
Well, you know what? If he's going to stay afloat, he's going to have to charge that, you know. And then people may not buy pints at his pub. But that's the reality of this. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if we go into double digits. I mean, American, and it's going to last for years. This is like a 3-year cycle. So you know, holidays abroad, you know, house renovations, all of that is going to have to be put aside.
You know, for someone like Adam, he can't just turn off his fridges because
he won't have
safety,
food.
there's sanity. You know, he's got to think. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on. What will the history books then say about today that Sweden decided to end its long-held neutrality and finally join NATO? Maybe that's the story that sticks around. That the President of the United States called the Russian invasion of Ukraine an act of genocide. Maybe that one crops up. Well, the pages of history will not, almost certainly, recall the intervention of Nigel Mills, the Tory MP for Amber Valley, who became the first Conservative to call on Boris Johnson to resign over Partygate. What must foreign nations make of Britain right now, days after our Prime Minister emerged as a standard bearer for the West, walking heroically alongside Volodymyr Zelensky in Kiev? He faces calls to resign here at home. Let's turn to the Conservative MP for Boston and Skegness. That's Matt Warman, who joins me now. Matt Warman, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Just straight off the bat, your position on the Prime Minister's position. You're a supporter. You're not a letter writer, are you? Presumably you have colleagues you know who did put letters in to the 1922 committee. Are they thinking twice now?
Well, I think you're right that some people are looking at that global picture, seeing how the Prime Minister has genuinely galvanised the West as a whole into genuinely opposing Putin in a way that really makes a difference, and are thinking again, yes, but at the same time, I do think it's important to realise that all MPs from all sides are getting people getting in touch, expressing a different view. So I think people do think about this stuff deeply, and that's the right approach.
What's the mailbag groaning with right now, Matt Warman? We were just talking to a publican who is really struggling with inflation. We were just talking a few moments ago to a former prison governor who thinks we need to spend a lot more time worrying about the influence of Islamist prisoners in some of our prisons. What's your mailbag groaning with?
Well, I've had about 24 emails on Partygate in the last since the fines were issued. I've had far more on the cost of living in all its different forms. You mentioned heating oil just a minute ago. Mine is a constituency where huge numbers of people rely on heating oil, on gas, because they're not connected to the mains grid. Those sorts of things have gone up massively more than the energy price cap has for mains electricity and gas. So it's that sort of thing that's really hurting people in the pocket, really making them have to worry about where the pounds have to come from to pay those bills. That's what people are getting in touch about. That's what the government and the Chancellor in particular, I think, is going to be focused on over the next few months. And that's absolutely right. I think the idea that we should be focusing anywhere else right now simply is not what the vast majority of voters would expect from a responsible government.
You mentioned the Chancellor, and since you did, what did you make of the time it took Rishi Sunak to make clear how he felt about receiving a fixed penalty notice? There were some people drawing attention to the fact that it took 5 or 6 hours for him to galvanise his staff into presenting a statement to the media. I have to say that strikes me as by the standards of the 24-hour news cycle, I was going to say an eternity, not quite, but you know what I mean. He seemed to take a while. Some commentators read that as evidence that Rishi Sunak was seriously thinking hard about whether it was time to fall on his sword. He's had a torrid fortnight. He feels that his wife had been dragged into political slagging matches and doesn't deserve to be. And there were people genuinely wondering whether he was considering his future in British politics.
Well, I think one of the downsides of the 24-hour news cycle is that people tend to overanalyse every minute of every day. I think what I would focus on is the fact that the Chancellor has issued a very firm, very clear statement saying that his focus is absolutely on making sure that he can get the economy into the best possible position to tackle those issues that we were talking about a moment ago. So I think it's always tempting to sort of say, well, is however many hours more significant than someone who was right out of the gate within minutes on Twitter? I think let's not get bogged down in the minutiae. Let's focus on where we actually are, and that is with a Chancellor and a Prime Minister focused on the issues that, as I say, are the real ones that constituents are writing to me about in the main. And I don't diminish the value of the apology that both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor wrote. I don't diminish the value of what constituents are getting in touch with me about when they express different views. But I do think ultimately we should be focusing on those major global issues.
Matt Warman, MP, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Sarah Elliott's alongside me. I think Matt Warman makes a good point there. We do get obsessed. We're in the rolling news business. We do sometimes see smoke where there is no fire. Sometimes, don't we?
Yes, well, and you want to see smoke where there is no fire too, so you have something to talk about. But yeah,
we never like for things to talk about. But I take your point. But
yes, I think that it's. They like to create drama, right? We like that tension between number 11 and number 10. But he issued a statement today, and that's all that voters will know. They're not going to notice the time.
Here's why it matters, though. Here's why it matters. It's why it's not just idle speculation that Rishi Sunak, in the eyes of many people, was the man most likely. And he seemed increasingly to Labour, as they refocused their attacks, their guns away from Boris Johnson onto Rishi Sunak. It seemed that Labour were taking very seriously the idea who's going to be our next Prime Minister. So if he actually was contemplating resignation, we're well within our rights to be talking about it.
Oh, I think so too. And also you have to remember when it first came out how much time he waited until he backed up the Prime Minister when it was first revealed. So yes, it's worthy of a good ponder and a good chat about it. But he seems he's not resigning.
Sarah, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, we're going to talk to your favourite, my favourite former police officer, Kevin Hurley. What's he got to tell you about today? We'll bring that to you after the break.
Join me, Nana Akweer, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GBNews. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone. We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GBNews on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back, 26 minutes past 5. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV Online and on digital radio. We've been reflecting today about our news values to some degree. Lots of you writing in saying, stop talking about Partygate, it's not relevant. What should we be talking about instead? A couple of stories we've not had time to cover today, and you could strongly argue, I think, that we ought to have touched them. The situation on NATO membership, Sweden historically saying it's now interested. Finland apparently is also registering interest and will make a decision in weeks. And also the serving, not former, serving head of the British Army. The Chief of the General Staff has said today in terms that he would like to see those defence cuts planned by this government that will take the size of the British Army down to 73,000, size of the British Army not since Napoleonic times. He wants to see those cuts reversed on another day. It would be a big story. Sarah Elliott's alongside me today to reflect on those stories. What do you think?
I think they signal that things in Ukraine are not settling down, that though Russia may be focusing its efforts on the east more, that Russia still poses a great threat to its neighbors. And I think it's a very big deal that Sweden wants to be part of the NATO alliance. And you know, this is quite a historic day. I mean, you know, the role they played during World War II.
We're running a story in the bulletin also about the possibility, obviously far from definitively proven at this stage, but the suspicion that some kind of I'm not going to say chemical weapons have been used in Ukraine, but the question's been raised, isn't it?
Right.
And we were talking in the commercial break, as an American, about what Joe Biden would do if and when that happens.
Right. I mean, Joe Biden has called him a war criminal. He has called it genocide. But what is there to back up his action? We saw under President Trump that when chemical weapons were used in Syria, he bombed Russian fighter jets and the airfield. What will Biden do? You know, it's all quite tense, and it's a tinderbox, and I think people are afraid to act. But, you know, something has to be done. There is genocide going on there. And you can make all the proclamations you want at the UN, but at the end of the day, how are we going to corner Putin and actually get this war to end?
Let me just throw up our Twitter poll today. Slightly arch question. I make no apologies for that, because I think that there is a way of looking at what's been reported about Partygate at the moment. Can we show it? Let's have a look. Apologies if you're listening on radio. Not many votes, but I still think it's a valid question. Nearly half of you think that we are trivia obsessed. And the fact, if you're looking at the situation with Partygate from abroad, in view of the fact there's a war in Ukraine right now, that this is not something that the British media political matrix should be particularly focused on right now.
And I don't think the international media is focused on this right now. Like, I don't think this is going to make headlines in the US, the Partygate.
Yeah. I mean, and just a third story that we've not mentioned, I mentioned it a few moments ago, head of the British Army saying it's nuts to be cutting the British Army right now.
Right.
I mean...
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a sign that our focus should be on defense spending, that NATO is definitely needs to stay alive and well and healthy. and that we're no longer in the post-war era. It is a new era of geopolitics, and we have to stick together. Another reason why Boris shouldn't step down, actually, because the West is as strong as ever right now. We've never seen the alliance as tight and so coordinated.
Just before we move on, there seems to be a slight contradiction, nay, a paradox in your thinking slightly as an American. Well, let me tease it out. Hear me out. And it's this: you're not a great fan of massive public spending.
Correct.
And yet, the American defence budget, I don't know how many times bigger than the UK defence budget is. It's at least twice, maybe 3 times. It's massive.
Okay, well, yeah, but in percentage-wise, maybe.
Riddle me that.
2 or 3. Well, yeah, well, I mean, as a conservative, I believe in strong national defence. So I believe in spending on that to deter our enemies. I believe in peace through strength. I believe in building
because actually having a war is a lot more costly.
Yes, having a war is. Let's scare people out of not having the war. Okay, first, I cut domestic spending. Cut foreign aid, cut all these other areas. There's so many pools to cut from, the dumb museums that get put up for no reason. A bridge to nowhere was very famous 15 years ago in Alaska, a $50 million bridge to literally an island where no one lived. I mean, there are all sorts of pet projects that can be cut, and so that's what we should be doing, while investing in our national security.
Emails on this, let me just share 2 or 3 with you. Taylor says, enough of this petty drama. We know Boris is a cavalier, he's very irresponsible, but we like him. Who else could be PM? Not a great selection in either party. Don't rock the boat. Terry says, Boris is a good leader. I say he's done nothing wrong. Time to move on. Barbara says, I wouldn't blame the Chancellor if he just walked away and let all the ungrateful idiots get on with it. To be even more cruel, let's have a Labour government that can once again crash the economy. Robert says, another plot by Remainers, the Labour Party, Liberal Democrats, SNP, trying to give Boris punishment for Brexit. In the meantime, all the opposition parties don't really care about our economy or our cost of living problems. Keep your thoughts coming in and your votes as well. In the meantime, I'm going to bring you the day's news bulletin with Polly.
Thanks, Colin. The latest headlines this hour. The Prime Minister has welcomed a whole life sentence for the terrorist who murdered the Conservative MP Sir David Amess. Boris Johnson says we must never allow acts of evil to triumph over democracy. Passing sentence, the judge in the case said Ali Harbi Ali had shown no remorse or shame for killing Sir David last October. Households are feeling the pinch as the cost of food essentials rose sharply last month. The price of bread and butter shot up along with other staples like milk and cooking oil. The cost of a loaf is now over 5% more than it was a year ago. Overall inflation jumped to 7% in the year to March. And the Prime Minister's position has been described as untenable by a Tory backbencher. Nigel Mills is calling for Boris Johnson's resignation. That comes after Mr Johnson, his wife and Rishi Sunak were fined by police for breaching COVID rules when they attended the Prime Minister's birthday during lockdown in 2020. They've all apologised and confirmed the fines have been paid. And the UK is sanctioning 178 Russian separatists for propping up breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine. The move has been coordinated alongside the European Union. And that comes as Moscow's bombardment of the country continues. In his latest address, the Ukrainian president said Russia is now using phosphorus bombs against Ukraine. And Russia's invasion of Ukraine has pushed Finland and Sweden to consider joining NATO. Finland says it'll make a decision about whether to apply to the alliance in the next few weeks. Sweden's defence ministry confirmed today it is one of the options on the table. And the Kremlin has warned that a further expansion of NATO will not bring stability to Europe. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. More from Colin Brazier after the break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV Online and on digital radio. When Sir David Amess was stabbed to death inside a church by an Islamist last year, there were reports that a Catholic priest who attempted to give the MP the last rites was prevented by police from doing so. It was a fairly confused picture and some contradictory reporting of what happened. It's not entirely clear what happened, but that's the gist of it. It prompted attempts to change the law so that a devout Catholic like Sir David would not be denied a sacrament that is given to thousands of dying Catholics around the world every year. It's now emerged that the College of Policing, which aims to set standards for officers, has adopted a new code that aims to make it easier for Catholic priests to administer the last rites, even when a police cordon is still in place. Let's turn to the former chaplain to the Queen, Dr. Gavin Ashenden, who joins me. Dr. Ashenden, thanks for your time. It was a confused picture that emerged from Southend at the crime scene, but we can imagine, can't we, that there could be some confusion in those critical minutes where people are trying to do different jobs under enormous pressure, but one of those jobs that doesn't fit into the emergency scenario in the eyes of a secular world is a priest trying to administer the last rites.
Yes, that's true, Colin. Although anyone who's a fan of war movies will be very familiar with an army chaplain, particularly during the D-Day invasions, doing exactly that. Their job was to be with the dying. Catholics believe in justice and forgiveness. And as we prepare for death, we know we're going to face justice and judgment, but we do it with forgiveness. And the last rites, not everyone knows what they are, but they're confession and anointing and the Eucharist. They're an enormously important part of the way we prepare ourselves to meet our God, who made us, loved us, judged us and died for us. And so, although, of course, you're quite right, it was any murder scene, any deathbed scene is a place of stress and anxiety. There was a great sense that the police didn't know what Catholic Christianity required. So it's very good news indeed that part of their training now incorporates that.
And just on the last rites, I mean, we're picturing that scene, you know, the beaches of D-Day, enormous pressure, a moment of drama, but very often the last rites are administered not just, you know, in the hours or the minutes before death, but in the days leading up to, and it's not always even necessarily a sign that somebody is definitely on the point of death. I mean, it's a sort of broader period than that, isn't it?
Yes, it is. There's a famous Catholic prayer which asks that we may not die unprepared. We're supposed to get ready to die at any time, effectively, and to live a life occasionally. But things happen you can't foresee, and so either during the course of an illness or a sudden tragedy, it's very important to be able to be accountable for our lives, and especially to experience the prayers of a priest and of our community, and the preparation for judgment, which is a very serious matter. So the last rites are a matter of comfort and sort of causally very powerful for us.
Doctor, what do you say to those people, not God-botherers like us, who look at this from the outside and you just see religion, and insofar as it played any part in the events, the bloody events of October last year in Southend, see somebody who was inspired by faith to kill someone?
Yes, I think it's a category error. And one of the things I would try and do when I'm having conversations like this is to say, look, for a moment, imagine, not with the same intention as John Lennon, but imagine there's no religion. We all have world views, whether we're atheists, agnostics, secularists, Muslims or Christians. We have a philosophy of the universe. And actually, atheists have just as much faith as Christians do. They can't prove there isn't a God. They take it as a matter of faith he's not. So we're all living lives of faith. And one of the things we're committed to do in our society is to tolerate each other's views and actually help each other. So I think Christians are entitled to say to a secular community, look, we respect your faith and the way you live. You happen to believe there's nothing after death. A, we can't even conceive of that, and B, we think Jesus rose from the dead. So would you please be generous with our faith, with our worldview as well? It's just a matter of being courteous with each other's worldviews, I think.
We were just, as you were speaking, Doctor, we were just seeing some pictures of Sir David Amess, and there were a couple where he's clutching dogs. I think if you stopped even people in the media and said, what do you know about David Amess? They'd say, well, he loved animals, he loved dogs. His love of the Catholic Church wouldn't feature. I'm not making a facetious point. I'm making the point that actually, for some people, it's a private matter. Do you think our MPs, our elected representatives, are open enough about their religious convictions, or are you happy with it staying private? Or does it actually tell us something else? Does it tell us that the mainstream media are uncomfortable talking about somebody's faith?
Well, it's a matter of private judgment, isn't it? I think any politician has to decide how they want to offer themselves to the public. But I think in terms of the way the church encourages to live and behave, we've been frightened and a bit anxious about the way in which faith is lived. As it happens, all the scientific reviews suggest that people who have faith are more sane, have children who are more stable, have marriages that last longer, and have less mental illness. There's a great deal to be said for having a Christian faith. And in the last 30 years, I taught as a psychologist at university. It's been very exciting since about 1980 when these surveys have come out, and we've been able to say, actually, people having faith is not an aberration. It's in fact something that works enormously well. It is in fact a facet of evolution. You could even say that in evolutionary terms, and again, studies have proved this, that those people with faith have more hope, more purpose, they forgive, more peace of mind. So I think that the way in which Christians have behaved over the last 50 years needs to change. I think we can be much more, we ought to be more confident and try and, sell's the wrong word, but try and communicate the fact that the way we live is a very constructive way of living. It has forgiveness, peace, love and justice at the heart of it, and above all, a purpose for living, knowing who you are, where you're going and why you're going there. So I'd advise politicians, if they ask me, to make more of their faith and to be less anxious. I think people will respect them for it.
Dr. Gavin Ashenden, we appreciate your thoughts as ever. Thanks very much indeed. Sarah Elliott is alongside me. It's Holy Week. I remember growing up and the pictures around, you'd look in people's windows, house windows, there was always that picture, so this is Holy Week. You don't see so many of them anymore. The practice of faith is much diminished compared to what it was, which I'm sure is a source of great sadness to Dr. Ashenden, but it feels like an unstoppable process.
It is. I mean, since the beginning of time, we've believed in a deity of some kind all over the world. And he made some beautiful points about faith and the attributes it brings to people's lives. And I have to say, with this new reversal, or this acknowledgement that a priest should have been at the scene with Sir David, I find that really hopeful in a secular time. You know, I'm a Catholic myself, and I was aghast that they wouldn't allow a priest to be at his side.
If that's what's happened, I mean, that was how it was reported,
right.
But there was some confusion.
But at least in this secularization or secularized world that we're in, that people acknowledge that those with faith deserve to have their rights respected. So I think this is a very positive move, and I think the doctor made a really good point that politicians should be more public and open with their faith.
Well, you come from a country where that's very much true, isn't it?
Yes.
Sarah Elliott, for now, thanks very much. If you drive, has your car come a cropper while driving over a pothole? If so, did it cross your mind to sue the local council? It's a course of action more than 37,000 motorists have chosen to follow in the last 4 years, apparently, and in a quarter of cases they were successful. They've been awarded compensation worth almost £13 million, though it's worth bearing in mind that these bills are settled by local authorities, which raise money from your taxes, so the compensation is effectively paid for by the rest of us. The figures on compensation, the fruits of an investigation by the magazine What Car, whose editor, Steve Huntingford, joins me now. Stephen, welcome to you, and well done with the story. It's interesting, thought-provoking. Is it a lot of money, 13 million?
Well, as you said, it is public money that's being spent on this. So yes, I would say it's money that could otherwise be spent on other things. And the trouble is it's coming about through short-termism. It's because roads are not being properly maintained that we're actually spending more compensating people. The average cost of filling a pothole is £47. The average cost of the claim is £347.
And it's patchy geographically. Some parts of the country do better and worse than others.
Yes, absolutely. It is indeed, because it is a local thing. So although the more the money comes from the national level, how that money is spent is then decided locally. And so that is why it is patchy.
But there are some parts of the country, I think Lincolnshire came out bottom stroke top of the table, depending how you're looking at the table, in terms of paying out for potholes.
Yeah, there were 5 areas of the country that had paid out more than £500,000.
Wow. And we know, don't we? It's become a hardy perennial for news outlets to bang on about potholes. To claim compensation, are we talking about cars that are written off here? I mean, is that actually? I mean, it must happen, I'm sure. But I mean, for the most part, it's people having a blowout or a dent, or is it? I mean, how serious is the problem?
So we're talking ranging from blowouts to a damaged wheel to suspension damage. Things like that is what you'll get from if you hit a pothole that hasn't been, that can cause that sort of damage. And particularly if it's suspension, that will be a significant cost to you as a motorist.
And we talk about COVID backlogs all the time, don't we? Usually apropos more important things like oncology and that sort of thing. But I would have thought that during lockdown, it was a fantastic time for council workmen. I won't say workwomen, there can't be many people filling potholes that are women. I'm sure they exist. But council workmen to get out there and repair the potholes.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the thing is, we have spent more in the last 5 years than we were spending previously, but the trouble is it's been going on so long while we've not been maintaining our roads. So it's estimated that we're basically 9 years behind, at about £12.6 billion behind in terms of keeping up with repairing the roads. And the trouble is when we repair them, too often we repair them in a hurry, which means the potholes come back, because that's the trouble. If the road's not repaired properly, then if it leaves cracks in the road, you'll get water gets into that crack. When it freezes over, it expands, it breaks the road again, and you have the same problem.
Yeah. Stephen Huntingford from What Car, thanks for the research, thanks for the story, and appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. Sarah Elliott's alongside me. Somebody's going to email me saying, I work on the roads. I'm a woman. I apologise.
Yeah, it's work people, Colin.
Work people, thank you.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on potholes while you're here?
Yeah, well, I was, when I read this story, I was kind of like, ooh, maybe I should, go out and find out where my potholes are.
You come from the most litigious country in the world.
Yes, exactly.
Why
can't I do this? And if I lived in Lincolnshire, I probably really would do that. But then, your guest reminded us it is public money. And again, I'm against taking public money unfairly, and especially so. you know, I'd probably give it a miss then.
Yeah, I was going to get into the sort of philosophy of actually, if you get compensation, that's sometimes the only thing that makes a public body set up a notice and start fixing potholes. But
yeah, the squeaky wheel gets the oil.
That's it. Literally squeaky wheel in this case. Countless Brits travelling during this Easter break have been met with some chaos, and they're being warned of worse to come. Hundreds of flights were cancelled, certainly weren't they, in recent weeks. And looking forward to the bank holiday weekend, it's the traditional Easter gridlock, perhaps compounded this year by the fact that during lockdown so many people weren't able to travel, not just on holidays, but to see relatives. And now there is a sense, isn't there, I think, that the country's opening up. This is the first big holiday for some people where they've been able to go and see far-flung relatives, perhaps. The Easter weekend approaching then. P&O ferries, their routes are still in trouble because of what happened there with the mass sackings. It all adds up to what could amount to some travel difficulty. It says in my script misery, but we've had enough misery today, so let's just call them troubles over the bank holiday weekend. Joining us now, the CEO of Blue Bay Travel, that is Alistair Rowland. Alistair, thanks so much for your time. We do, around about this time of the week before the Easter weekend, we'll do, all news outlets do a story about travel misery. Is there any reason to assume it's going to be worse than normal?
Well, certainly airports have had some difficulty, both by border force and getting through security and such like. But we do need to urge caution here because we're creating our own problems. Largely, I was at Manchester Airport last night, and it was completely fine. Everybody went through yesterday within an hour, probably slightly more than normal. But people have forgotten how to go on holiday. So what's happening right now is they're turning up with their cabin bag with lots of liquids that are over 100 ml, stuff that people would know. And that's creating an unnecessary series of backlogs. So what I would say is, turn up early, 3 hours if it's the airport instead of 2 hours, but not 5 or 6 hours because the airport doesn't want the people. And all of the kind of shortages of staff, that's largely becoming corrected. There are some difficulties of border force on the return, but generally, actually, most of the significant difficulties in getting away for the Easter break, we're through those now. So just be sensible, check your passport, check what's in your cabin bag, go through and remember what it's like to get on holiday.
Remember fondly. Alistair, just in terms of those staff shortages, I mean, was it the case, do you think, whether it's airlines or airports, that this is a function of people being off with COVID, or whether it's more historical than that? It's a function actually of cuts that were made by organisations who were just dealing with no footfall for months and months and months and months, and they haven't just quite yet rehired all the people they need to.
Yes, for sure, all of those things. So there's certainly a big debate in the travel industry right now about who's to blame that the airports haven't recruited to the same level they had before COVID. But of course, that's difficult, and passing security is very difficult in terms of new hires. So they are getting on with that. Again, the example from Manchester yesterday is they've got 40 new starts every day actually being passed through to ease the congestion. And with airlines particularly, you will be hearing about cancellations of flights. Certainly BA and EasyJet have been mentioned, and that's largely crews going down with COVID, so they're having to consolidate flights, and that would have happened anyway. But in general, I think most of the people who are going away for Easter are away now or just about to go away, and actually the stuff that you will have been showing on your programme last week and towards last weekend, we're largely through that now. So I think if you're going away midweek this weekend, be sensible, as I've said, and plan your trip. Make sure you don't do anything that's going to put you in a big queue, and you'll get through okay. And in terms of resource for airlines, airports, that is easing. But as we all know, in industries generally, particularly service industries, there's a lack of people now, and therefore it is going to take some time to catch up.
Alistair Rowland, really appreciate your time and your optimism. Thanks very much indeed. We've been debating over the last hour and a half, 2 hours, whether the media is over-egging matters when it comes to Partygate, and that actually it has no real bearing on the real world, least of all what's happening in Parliament. A counterblast to that analysis comes from this news that the Conservative peer, David Wolfson, has quit as Justice Minister in the past few minutes, as has been reported, over, quote, the scale, context and nature of breaches of COVID regulations in Downing Street, saying in a letter to Boris Johnson it was a matter of the Prime Minister's, quote, own conduct, as well as the actual events. So a ministerial resignation in the wake of those fixed penalty fines handed out to the Chancellor, the Prime Minister's wife, Carrie Johnson, and the Prime Minister himself, the name of the minister concerned, who is a peer, by the way, David Wolfson, so a member of the House of Lords, not the lower chamber, the House of Commons. Sarah Elliott's alongside me to reflect on that. If you'd said a week ago that the Prime Minister was going to get a fixed penalty notice for Partygate, would there be resignations? You'd probably say, what would you say?
I don't know, maybe, but again, the momentum of that time of when Partygate broke in January and February seems to have passed, and we're just on to bigger things like the war in Ukraine. And as you've said, you know, we have images of Boris now with Zelensky and Kiev itself walking around, and that basically, you know, is the moment, is the leader that we have, and I don't think people want to rock the boat at this very tense moment in geopolitics.
I'm just going to sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to just, while we've got a moment, I'm just going to read out a bit more from that letter of resignation from Lord Wolfson, Justice Minister. He said, justice may often be a matter of courts and procedure, but the rule of law is something else, a constitutional principle which is, at its root, means that everyone in a state, and indeed the state itself, is subject to the law. I regret that recent disclosures lead to the inevitable conclusion that there was repeated rule-breaking and breaches of the criminal law in Downing Street. I have again, with considerable regret, come to the conclusion that the scale, context and nature of those breaches mean that it would be inconsistent with the rule of law for that conduct to pass with constitutional impunity. And so there departs Lord Wolfson. We'll bring you more news, including that news, with Jubes and Co. Our thanks to Sarah Elliott. That's all for now.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Some heavy showers around today. They'll be fading through the evening and overnight, and for most, it's looking like a dry and a bright day to come tomorrow. Low pressure near to the northeast of Scotland, bringing some pretty wet and cold weather across the far northeast, but elsewhere it's been by and large fine, but we have seen some big showers developing across central and southern parts of England and southern parts of Wales. Those heavy downpours still continuing for the next few hours before steadily fading away through this evening, and most places dry from midnight onwards. The wet weather in the far northeast also starting to ease. It is going to turn murky and misty across the south in particular, and temperatures dropping down to the mid-single figures. On to Thursday, and it will by and large be a dry and a bright day, but it is going to start pretty grey across the Midlands, South Wales, southern England. It may take a while before that cloud clears away. Quite cloudy too over Northern Ireland and western Scotland. A little bit of drizzly rain is possible at times here. It could be quite wet in the Western Isles, but for the vast majority, it is going to be a dry day, and it'll probably brighten up quite a bit as well. So some places seeing some sunshine, and temperatures responding to that sunshine as well. The warmest weather across eastern England, 2021, elsewhere generally mid to high teens. A bit more of that patchy rain, just fringing into the highlands at times through the nights, but otherwise, again, it's generally going to be a dry night with clear spells. Again, turning a little misty in some